I thought for a long time I didn't like Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
Right? For a long time, I thought I didn't like Brussels sprouts until I had them cooked right, and now it's one of my favorite foods.
And you just roast them a little bit, put a little bacon on there. They're
So
delicious.
good. Right?
Listener, I am shaking my head. I want you to know that. For those of you who believe that Brussels sprouts are unlikable, are not going to be part of the new creation.
What are you even saying,
Crazy.
neighbors?
I see you.
Crazy.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of reflection and collaboration as we seek to keep growing as teachers. This podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name is Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGroat.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Friends, we're always looking for topics of conversation and feedback, so please email us at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. Your feedback is important, and we look forward to hearing from you. Dave and Abby, one of the books I'm reading right now is called Why Kids Love and Hate School. The impetus for the book came from a conference the authors organized that was provocatively titled Why Kids Hate School, and they were challenged to rethink the question because someone surmised that more kids actually love school than we realize.
Oh, yeah.
And the authors agreed, sort of. The authors believe that there's a lot about school that students love. They see their friends each day. They escape their parents for a few hours. For others, it's a place where the heat is always on and food is often available. And yet, not only do students not love school or even feel neutral about it, some do actually hate it. I was intrigued by some of the chapter titles. How You Teach is What You Teach. Students don't love school when school doesn't love them back. Must we always stay on the struggle bus? And invitational learning, building school culture with love. So I guess my wondering today is, do you think more kids love school than hate school? And what might we do to help students love school and keep on loving it? And what do we do when kids hate it? Because some do. And that,
Right.
I know, makes all of us sad. So just some initial reactions to this idea of, of loving and hating school. Like, how about your own story for each of you? Like, what was your relationship with school, if I can ask that?
Sure.
Yeah, I liked school.
Of course you did.
None of us are surprised, but no, that's great.
In a shocking development.
Right. I don't
Always, Abby? Like, just...
I don't remember having wanting to, obviously, I'm tired today, I don't feel like getting out of bed sorts of things. But
sure.
I cannot remember, hating it and having periods of time where, I did not want to go specifically to school. Right? So, always...
What drew you to go, if I can ask? Because I think I've been pretty open with you, and I've referenced it at times. I did not have that relationship with school. So I'm genuinely, and I mean it, genuinely fascinated and intrigued when I run into people who are like, no, I really actually overall loved school. So, what drew you to it, or what for you made it, such a wonderful experience?
Yeah, I think people are always my answer to that.
Interesting.
Yep. I loved the people I was, teachers I felt invested in. I liked classmates, got along. I thought that was a good part of my experience. All the adults in the building, I didn't have, besides minor things, I don't remember having hugely negative experiences with any of the adults in the building. So I felt known. I felt like I belonged. I was part of things, and I'm a curious person. I like to learn. I like to read. Comes naturally. So I loved the work of school. Honestly,
Sure.
It was challenging and intriguing, and
I would echo a lot of that.
Yeah.
I too loved school.
Yeah.
I loved school as a student. I didn't always love classmates. I had some classmates who were really mean to me, and so that part was harder for me.
Yeah, that is hard.
As far as the work of school, I was good at it. I was good at school, if that makes sense.
So you felt
right?
competent.
Yeah. And I knew, and that sounds kind of cynical, right? As if school's a game, but I was good at the game of school, right? I'd figured out how to play this game, and I had enough of the skills that are required to do well in school that I tended to do well in school, and I had a reputation as kind of a teacher's pet, to be honest with you. I was voted most likely to invite a teacher over for supper by my senior class, right?
So shocking development.
I know. So here I am, right? And I joke about that sometimes. We teach future teachers, and who wants to become a teacher? Well, it tends to be the people who are good at school, who loved school. And so that shapes, I think, the way a lot of us in teacher education, anyway, think about the work that we're doing.
Right. How was your experience different, Matt?
Yeah, I'm just, as you guys are both talking, I'm really struck, if I to be really transparent, of the correlation, and I don't know the research on this, about the correlation between how kids did academically and their love for school.
Yep.
I believe that's
Right?
true.
So it's like, so how much of it is, well, when you do well at school, you're easier to love.
Ooh.
And when school is hard for you, are you harder to love? And do you pick up those messages as a young child or teenager? And do you, I want to believe, using your language, assuming good intent, Dave, subconsciously sending messages to students that they're not loved as much.
Yeah.
Because they don't either play the game or have the resources or have the support at home or for whatever reason. And it actually leaves me feeling a little melancholy on it, and I didn't anticipate that, because before we started this and recorded, we were laughing and joking and telling stories, and suddenly I'm just reflecting on that. Like, so do you have to be good at school to love school?
It's a great question.
And I don't know the answer.
That is a good question, because I'm thinking about some students who I've taught who I would say were not great students, and yet they were some of my favorite students. But
I've definitely had that experience as well.
But it takes a lot more dedication on my part as a teacher, and the benefit I had as a middle school teacher of teaching kids for multiple years. And so even if, like, at the beginning of it, like, oh man, this kid is difficult, and I don't necessarily like, you always love them, but sometimes you don't like the things that they do, right? And I had some of those students, but as you actually get to know them and kind of that encounter with them as a real human being, like a whole person, not just my caricatured idea of who this student is. And some of these kids who were very difficult students for me ended up being, I know teachers can never play favorites, you're not supposed to, right? But they became some of my favorite students that I got to teach. And I'd like to think that made a difference for the way they felt about school too. I don't know that for a fact, but I think it matters.
Well, and I think I agree with you that it's harder for kids who find school difficult to feel at home, because so much of it is academically oriented.
Yeah.
Right? But I think schools are doing a better job of creating spaces for a lot of different kids to thrive in, right? I look at FFA programs, I look at just the variety of extracurriculars that are available that weren't when I was in school. I look at the ways that my kids are drawn into community that have nothing to do with school at their school.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Right?
And those are all things, I mean, those sound like maybe some small tweaks, but they end up being not insignificant for the kids who are benefiting from that, right? Yeah.
I can just remember, and again, this is a long time ago, but I can imagine that at some level, or maybe it looks different today, like all those things are good, and I was involved in some of those things, but in the end, school is about academic results. Yeah. Like it is. Still,
that's the purpose.
Right? It is, right? And at some point, I just remember, and again, as I'm talking about it, the memory is so vivid for me of just, here comes another test back. As we hand them out publicly, knowing exactly how I did. And it was never good. And it was just like, I think in the end, just feeling, and some of it my own doing. Like, let's be really clear. I also made choices. Like, I got to own a lot of that story, folks. But just also, deciding to play the game in a different way.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I played the game. I played the game of, well, I know how this goes, so I'm going to live into that.
Right.
Right. So you get beat down with your grades aren't good enough or your academic results aren't good enough. Well, then I remember yelling loudly how bad I did or how poorly, or bragging about homework not being done because I could work so hard,
Right.
and it still it never felt good enough. And then how discouraging is that? And I think that's why I think I can react sometimes to even things when I'm in a school and I see honor rolls or I see because it's like for so many students like myself, you could work so hard and never get up on that board, and for others, they get up on there with hardly much. Like it came easy to them, and that's a gift from God. Like that they were. So it just makes me, as I'm replaying it all in my head, and again many years ago. But I just think, what must that be like for students today? That right. That
you want to play the game on your own terms, then?
Yeah, right? Totally.
Not as it's dictated to you.
Totally,
right?
and I'm going to make my own rules.
Right.
Because the rules that have been set don't work for me.
Yeah.
Right, and then I started reacting, and like I said, I have to own a ton of that story.
I wonder how much of that is reflective of the systems that we've built into schools.
Well, sure, right? So if kids don't love school, is it something about the way that we're doing it that's making it unpleasant for them in some way?
Like for example, the 4.0 grading scale, right? It in many ways, it does not serve student learning.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about, I'm going down a weird path. In Intro to Ed the other day, we were talking about intelligence. And so hear me out on this, right? The idea, there are some people who would say intelligence is something that you have or you don't have, right? Like this is the IQ test version. We can measure exactly how much intelligence you have. And I was pushing on that with students and talking about multiple intelligence theories. And I really like Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. Sorry, I'm going to go geek out here for a second, right? So Sternberg's triarchic theory says, yes, there is such a thing as analytical intelligence. That would be like what we typically would call book smarts, school smarts, right? You're good at literacy and mathematics and logical thinking and stuff. But there's also practical intelligence, and that would be what we'd call street smarts, right? Yeah. So like some people just can read the room and know how they're supposed to react, right? And then there's also creativity, which he also calls intelligence, creative intelligence. You can generate novel solutions to problems. In schools, we typically promote and value analytical intelligence at the detriment of practical and creative intelligence, right? And so it just has me wondering, could we find ways of making all of those intelligences equally valuable in school, right? So that you're going to have kids who have different relative strengths, and they're bringing their strengths to bear, right? Yeah. And so not every kid is going to have the same level of analytical. That doesn't let them off the hook. We want to grow that for every kid, but let's celebrate what they bring to this then, right?
But I think as long as you have a 4.0 GPA, all that's good.
Right.
It still says what we value above it. And maybe there's no way to avoid that. Like I'm just, that's part of the game of school, I still think, right? It's like in the end, and all those other things are good, but in the end, how do we avoid helping students correlate their value against the GPA?
Well, and that's the problem.
And maybe it's impossible.
Okay. So then let's build a better... Okay, I'm going to make a weird analogy here, right? Like, I thought for a long time I didn't like Brussels sprouts. Yeah. Right? For a long time, I thought I didn't like Brussels sprouts until I had them cooked right, and now it's one of my favorite foods.
And you just roast them a little bit, put a little bacon on there. They're
so
delicious.
Good. Right?
Listener, I am shaking my head. I want you to know that. For those of you who believe that Brussels sprouts are unlikable, are not going to be part of the new creation.
What are you even saying,
Crazy.
I see you.
Crazy. For the record, the bacon was my suggestion, and it takes it to another level.
So
I'm
good.
serious. Like, cut them up, put like tiny pieces of bacon on a sheet pan with olive oil and salt and pepper. It's like a new. It's like candy.
It's so good, Matthew.
It's delicious.
This is like the answer to everything in Iowa. Put bacon on it. People like it.
Put bacon on it and roast it.
It'll be delicious.
Deep fat fry it.
No.
To my point, though.
Yeah.
So what if we find... Okay, we're not putting bacon on our schools here, although that probably wouldn't hurt. But I mean this in all seriousness, right? Like, could we reimagine things in such a way? Like, what if the recipe we're following is wrong?
Right.
And, I mean, that's a pretty bold thing to suggest. Like, what? Okay, I'm looking at the cover of the book you have here, Why Kids Love and Hate School. I want every student to love school. I wish that they would. Maybe that's pie in the sky to think everyone's going to love school. But what am I going to do as a teacher? What am I going to do as a school leader that's going to make this a place where every kid can flourish?
Yeah, it's interesting as you said that too, Dave. Like, I am suddenly thinking, even in my own, like when I started reading this book, I have no problem confessing that I'm 50 years old. And in the introduction, they talk about how the question they brought up that I shared earlier was why do kids hate school? And someone said, well, I think more kids actually love school. They're more wired to. And it's never occurred to me in my life. And part of that's probably because of my own story.
Sure.
What, like, really? You think more kids love school than hate school? I've never actually considered that. And yet, they might be right, and so that's part of my question is I wonder if the reimagining is how do we leverage that most students actually come in loving it, like
and I'd say that's really true for younger grades. I'd say that's even more true.
Yeah, the younger kids tend to love school more, and so is there something we're doing that's kind of squashing that love? Because I would say by the time I saw kids in middle school, some of them are getting kind of jaded, and you could usually get them at middle school, but they didn't all love it anymore. And I wonder that for high school, you taught high school for a lot of years.
Oh, there was lots of them.
Yeah, where it's just kind of squashed out of them.
Oh, absolutely.
But then, so what's the bacon? No, like honestly, like what's the right? Like it's.
I think it's work that they care about, and that they can invest themselves in. That they see worthy of their time. Right.
If the curriculum is meaningful and accessible for students, right? So things that they're going to care about and things that connect with their lives. Now that's a big ask, maybe, right? Because I think when I taught 8th grade math and I'm teaching them graphing inequalities, and I have a kid who said, Mr. Mulder, when are we ever going to use this in real life? And my answer is, you're not, right? Because you're not in real life. Like, when are you ever going to graph inequality? That's a math class thing. Okay, so how do I make that accessible and meaningful for students? Can we bring in some playfulness? Can we bring in some sort of meaning that's going to make this enjoyable for who they are right now as a 13-year-old, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And that makes me wonder about. And how do you do that without knowing your students?
Oh my goodness!
Right?
Yes.
Which I think is part of the how do you help students love school or grow their love, or at least I think part of it is just knowing them, right? Knowing what they're passionate about. Like, this is why I just think things like check-in questions, like trying to ask them what they need to feel supported. What is it? What do you want me, how do you want me to speak to you when things go wrong? Or what do you need when things are spiraling out of control is actually get to know what they need. Like to elevate their voices, that they have value. Now that doesn't make all the problems go away, but I do think, hey, when you struggle in school, at least I'm known. Like it's clear to me my teacher values me.
Right.
Beyond the grades, and like I said, without pointing fingers, I'm not sure that in looking back sometimes I knew that, but also other times I knew I wasn't enough, or I wasn't known. I was just telling a story to our friend Justin about how I was when I was 7 or 8 years old, would spend hours by myself sorting out hockey cards, like hours, and that's where I learned how to do math. Adding up goals and assists and penalty minutes on the back, and at some point, like, I was really good at math, and by grade 10 I hated math. But I just remember thinking like this. So there was an example. Like I would have done anything in math if it would have been related to what I was passionate about.
Right.
But you say graph inequalities?
Yeah, right.
I get a shiver that goes up the back. Again, I'm 50. I don't even know what that means. Right?
Yeah.
So I do think part of it is how do you leverage their love for school, and how do you leverage what they're passionate about, what their giftedness is about. But Dave and Abby, the question still for me is like, there are kids who do hate it, or it's just hard, and there could be reasons outside of our classroom that we have no control over. Like, is there other things that you're thinking of is like, hey, like when it was hard, and is it possible to move those students along in a different trajectory, I guess?
I think what you were saying, Matt, about having every student needs to have a cheerleader on the faculty, right? They have to have a teacher, at least one teacher who they feel a strong, solid connection, because I think there's a kind of social and emotional support that comes through that you are seen and you are cared for and you are loved, regardless of anything you've done or not done, that you're going to have someone who's just going to advocate for you. And that means teachers, we've got to spend the time to get to know the students for that. Is that going to solve all our problems? No. But it won't hurt.
It reminds me, Dave. My friend Larry was telling a story about how at one of their Pro D meetings, they put a picture of every student on the wall in the faculty room, and basically what they did is they all got like a dot or something, and they said if you feel like you have a deep relationship and know this student, put a dot by him.
Yep.
And at the end, then they started noticing and wondering the students who don't have dots. Right? And I just thought
what a great idea.
I just thought
that's
that was so powerful. Right?
Yeah.
Even as he was telling me, I was like, man, I wish I would have thought of that as a principal, because I think part of it is I have often assumed, well, that student's known by someone in the school. But essentially what they're saying is actually no, not everyone does know that.
Small groups can be another effective way to organize that, right? That have outside of academics some sort of a homeroom or a small group or
And the other, I'm going to come back to that sense of curriculum being meaningful and relevant. I think, yes, the caring adults, yes, we need to have that. But I also think we need to do a better job, perhaps, at looking at the curriculum and saying, what are we actually trying to do with this curriculum?
And what's the big picture here versus the minutia?
Yes.
Right. What are we working towards?
Let's
what
not
is our
get
goal
lost in
here?
the
What is
details.
the provocative question that we're trying to answer?
Yeah.
What are we trying to discover?
Things that students are actually going to care about and that matter for more than the 60 minutes of today's class, right?
Yeah, that makes me wonder, Abby, when you said that, is maybe the question, and I read this somewhere, the question isn't what do you want to be? The question for students should be, what problem do you want to solve?
Yeah.
And I just think even their answer to that would give us some indication into who they are and what they value.
And would reorient the purpose of school.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Versus I want to get a job so that I can be successful to how can I contribute to God's world, right? How can I be a disciple?
Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. Whether it is this day, this week, this month, or this school year, we hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And we'd like to send you from here with this blessing. So to our listeners, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace and give you peace and give you peace. Amen. Thanks for listening, everyone. Have a good week.
This podcast was literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Hey, we have a favor to ask of you. Would you be willing to rate this podcast or write a review in your podcast app? Or if you found this conversation interesting or helpful, would you consider sharing it on your social media? Those things really do help podcasters out, and we would be so, so grateful. Thanks for listening, friends. Oh, let's do it.
I literally have no idea how I'm going to answer this question. Nebraska. What a country. What a state. Sorry.